Hello and welcome to this episode of India and the World on DeKoder. I'm Nidhi Razdan. The US Iran ceasefire has completely collapsed, and we are now in the midst of an almost full scale war once again between both sides, a war that is threatening the global economy yet again. We've heard Donald Trump in the last 24 hours threaten to blow up bridges and power plants in Iran as long as Iran continues to target ships that are passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has responded to that by saying that there will be an eye for an eye and that it will not take any US threats lying down. So, where does all of this leave Trump's Iran policy? Does he actually have a plan? How did this ceasefire agreement that was signed in June unravel so quickly? And what is the road ahead? We have a very special guest with us on the program today, the former National Security Advisor to President Trump in his first administration, distinguished diplomat and ambassador. Ambassador John Bolton is with us from the United States today. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us on the program. I wanted to begin by asking you about the crisis now engulfing the region once again. We've seen 12 straight days of strikes and counter strikes between both sides. Is this now pretty much war once again?
Well, I think it essentially is, although it's at a lower level than it was at the very beginning. I think on the memorandum of understanding breaking down, I think that was essentially inevitable, in large part because I don't think today Iran has a fully functioning government. I think the attacks by the United States and Israel in March and April did a very substantial job of eliminating layer after layer of top government officials. And so, what I think you have now are pieces of a government, but no one of which is dominant over the others. And they're in a continual internal struggle for power to see how the regime will be run. So, therefore, if you look at the MOU, that was negotiated through intermediaries with the civilian side of what's left of the government, the president, the foreign minister, the speaker of the parliament, which I use that term loosely. But they negotiated the MOU. They have no authority, no command capability over the Revolutionary Guard, which is, as its name implies, guards the 1979 Islamic Revolution. They control the nuclear weapons program. They control the terrorist proxies. They have the internal besieged militia that represses the population. And they control access to the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. So they didn't like the memorandum of understanding, and they just didn't agree with it. That's why we're really back at war. We can go and negotiate with the civilians again, and it'll likely produce the same result.
What then would you say is Trump's plan? Or as you wrote recently, that he really doesn't seem to have one. The objectives of this war have also consistently shifted from the American side. But is that more so now with hostilities having escalated again, that there's really no roadmap about where this is going?
No, that's exactly right. There is no plan. There is no strategy. There is no roadmap. Trump is doing this by the seat of his pants, one day at a time. His principal concern, what led to the ceasefire originally after the 6 weeks of U.S. Israeli strikes, this is even before the MOU, was that he saw that global petroleum prices were rising sharply, and that was contributing to a very visible increase in the United States of the price of gasoline for consumers at the pump. And he could see that was going to have obviously a very negative effect on his approval ratings and could be very negative for Republican candidates in this November's midterm congressional elections. So that's when he declared a ceasefire victory. Basically, everything had been accomplished, focused not on the geostrategy of the Middle East, but on American consumers' concern about high prices. That hasn't worked out. We can see in action as we speak that prices have now risen above $100 a barrel for Brent crude oil, and other prices are going up as well. So we're basically right back where we were when he declared the first ceasefire after the 6 weeks of strikes. I don't think he knows what comes next.
You mentioned, the price of oil, and as we speak, it is hovering around that $100 a barrel. Are you also concerned that, apart from the fact that the Strait of Hormuz continues to be under the grip of Iran's attacks, you also have the militant group, the Houthis, announcing that they will not allow Saudi tankers through the Red Sea corridor, and already we're seeing an impact on that corridor, which could further push the world economy into crisis.
No, I think that's a very important point. Obviously, for purchasers of oil from the Gulf in South Asia, East Asia, and the Pacific, Saudi oil, to a significant extent, not at pre-war production levels, but a significant part of it was coming by pipeline across the Arabian Peninsula to the port of Yanbu, and then loaded there, coming through the Bab el Mandeb Strait at the southern end of the Red Sea, and then out into the Indian Ocean to wherever the purchasers might be. If that's cut off, the only alternative route is to go north through the Suez Canal all the way around Africa, and then hopefully to the customers. So I think this is clearly a move by Iran, which funds and arms the Houthis to try and put more pressure on Saudi Arabia in particular, but to the consumers of that oil who are now going to be cut off. To me, this simply underlines the necessity ultimately of getting rid of the regime in Tehran. I wish, if Trump had intended a campaign of regime change, he certainly didn't go about it the right way. I'm not defending the way he did go about it. I am saying, if you want an end to this problem, it means ending the regime in Tehran. You can negotiate anything you want with that regime. They simply won't adhere to it.
You, of course, have been a long-standing advocate of regime change in Iran, which is, very controversial, because when you look at the American record of regime change, whether it was in Iraq or in Libya, it actually threw up a political vacuum. It created more chaos and instability in those countries. So the question is, why would it be different in Iran?
Well, I think the situations are different. I think the problem in Iraq turned out to be that we didn't turn authority over to the Iraqis themselves more quickly, and by setting up the Coalition Provisional Authority, we postponed the day of reckoning for the Iraqi people themselves. Libya was not something that anybody particularly planned. It was a chaotic situation internally because of the opposition to Gaddafi. There are other examples where things have gone better, but the point is, in Iran, you have a country seeking nuclear weapons. You have a country with the world's largest network of terrorist surrogates: the Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in the Gaza Strip, the Houthis in Yemen, Shia militia in Iraq. So it's both an aspiring nuclear power and a current terrorist threat. I just think living with these threats is unacceptable. And if we could find a way to get, for example, to a military government other than the Revolutionary Guard, the regular military, then I think they'd have a chance to have some kind of constitutional discussion about what regime they wanted to replace the Ayatollahs. The Ayatollahs are authoritarian, medieval religious fanatics. Not a good sign, not a good way to build a peaceful and secure Middle East.
But isn't a better way to do that, to let it happen organically within Iran, as was in a sense already happening with the protests there? I mean, many parts of the world see this American action in Iran as unfounded, a sort of a war, a pointless war. At the end of the day, and that regime change will only create further chaos and instability. So, isn't this something that should come from the people of Iran, then, rather than external forces like the Americans?
Well, the people of Iran are very dissatisfied with the regime. There's no doubt about it. They went out into the streets in protest in December and January, and the regime machine gunned them, killing 40,000 or more of its own citizens. So it's a pretty bloodthirsty regime. I think that the one of the mistakes that Trump made before launching the attacks was not coordinating really in any significant way with opponents of the regime inside the country. The opponents are very widespread. As I say, the economy is a wreck. The young people are dissatisfied with the regime. Women are dissatisfied with the regime after the murder of Masi Amini 3 years ago. Ethnic groups like the Baluchis in the southern part, the Kurds in northwestern Iran are dissatisfied. I think it's a regime that's ripe for coming down. But the opponents need help. They need money. They need communications. They need weapons. We could have been providing that. We could have worked with the Kurds. There's talk that that was in play, but Erdogan of Turkey called Trump and asked him to call it off, which he did. Uh, I'm not defending how Trump has conducted this, but I do think when you try for 47 years to negotiate with a regime like the one in Iran and find that they do not moderate their conduct, if anything, they increase their support for terrorists around the world, they increase their support for ballistic missile capabilities and for their nuclear program. Unless you're content to live with those threats, then the only alternative, having failed at changing their behavior, is to change the regime.
But it also does throw up questions about American policy, doesn't it, Ambassador? If the Americans don't like a regime, they'll just go and change it. You don't like the Venezuelan leadership, you go kidnap their president, which is what it effectively was. You don't like the regime in Iran. There was no evidence of any credible immediate threat that the Iranians were posing to Israel or the United States. I mean, at the end of the day, those questions will linger over whether this administration respected international law.
Well, the Iranians aren't respecting international law today. The Strait of Hormuz is an international waterway that should be open to the innocent passage of all commercial vessels. They're violating international law. When the Iranians fire at tankers, civilian ships in the Gulf or the Strait, that's violating international law. I don't think the United States was impatient on this. We waited 47 years before taking this action. And I think that is justified in many respects because of the number of Americans the regime has killed over the years, beginning with the bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Lebanon in 1983. And as for Maduro in Venezuela, he stole the 2018 presidential election in Venezuela. We supported the opposition. They tried to overthrow the government there. They failed. In 2019, in 2024, Maduro stole the election again, as international observers confirmed. And the people of Venezuela find themselves oppressed and with Russians, Cubans, and Chinese all over their country. They were the ones calling for us to aid them. And I think it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do in Trump's first term. It's the right thing to do now. We haven't completed getting rid of this regime of thugs in Venezuela. Maduro may be gone, but the same thieves are still running it.
Well, I mean, that's of course a much larger debate on how American foreign policy has played out as far as regime change and the respect of international law is concerned. But coming back to the Iran war, I mean, look, the Strait of Hormuz was open for everyone, for oil tankers to pass through for free before this war. And we're in a much worse position today because Trump decided to strike Iran. And, we're all suffering because of it. But Ambassador, you wrote a detailed piece in the British Telegraph newspaper, I think it was yesterday or the day before, where you outlined some options for Trump, now that he really doesn't seem to have a plan and is in a way stuck. And one of the things that you've strongly advocated is more economic, in a sense, pressure on Iran and to really squeeze it economically till there actually is regime change. How would that work exactly, given that economic sanctions haven't really worked against Iran all these years either?
Well, that's because the sanctions haven't been effectively enforced. The most effective enforcement agency I can think of now, that's the United States Navy, has imposed, again, a blockade on the import or export of anything to Iran by sea. And before Trump ended the first blockade with the Memorandum of Understanding, we had essentially cut traffic to and from Iran's ports to zero. So what that means is that Iran is not earning any foreign currency exchanges from the sale of oil or other related products. It can't import anything. That's a way to put a real squeeze on the Revolutionary Guard. If they can't pay the Quds Force, if they can't pay the besieged militia or their other components, eventually those components may turn on the leaders of the Revolutionary Guard, which would be a very good thing. At the same time, I believe we can effectively open the export of oil from the Gulf Arab states I think we may need to do that by military force, but we've been getting at least some oil out for the past couple of months. I think we could increase that. I think we need to deal with the threat posed by the Houthis in the Red Sea. These are fundamental objectives of American foreign policy, freedom of the seas, that we pursued before we were even a nation. So I think this is all up for discussion. I don't know what Trump is going to do. I think more of our allies and more of the countries that want oil from the Gulf should figure out how to help. Otherwise, you leave the regime in Tehran effectively able to threaten closure of the Strait of Hormuz like turning on and off a light switch. And let me just say, it is a problem for Trump that he didn't prepare for this eventuality. It's not like people didn't realize the threat of closing the strait was there. Indeed, within weeks of the 1979 revolution, Jimmy Carter had convened meetings of the U.S. National Security Council to discuss what to do if Iran tried to close the strait. And in the Reagan administration, we reflagged Kuwaiti tankers with the American flag to help get them out of the Gulf and the strait because of the threat that Iran was posing. There's nothing new about that threat. Everybody could see it coming, except Trump, apparently.
And so, would you say that perhaps Trump really underestimated the Iranian response to this war?
You know, I was not obviously in any of these discussions leading up to the war. Trump has a very limited attention span. He hears what he wants to hear. He doesn't hear what he doesn't want to hear. I've got to believe that the Pentagon leadership told him that there was a risk of the strait being closed, told him there was a risk of American bases and civilian targets in the Gulf being attacked, told him pretty much all of these risks. And that's a legitimate function for defense and other advisors. If you're going to undertake military action, you have to think of the potential consequences and what the second and third order effects could be. That's kind of too deep for Trump, I think. It's possible he was persuaded by how well the operation against Maduro went. I'm sure his advisors, or at least one or two of them, told him that Iran is not Venezuela. I just think he didn't pay any attention.
Does he listen to advisors? You would know.
Well, one of his former close advisors, Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, was asked back in 2016 by a reporter who said, does Trump ever listen to you? And Giuliani paused for a minute and said, yeah, about 20% of the time.
Well, I think that pretty much sums up the state of the Trump administration right now. But Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much for your time today and your perspective on this big story that continues to dominate the world, whose impact is felt far beyond the Middle East to all different corners of the world, as it were. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.